Look around you right now. Notice anything different? Your neighbor's house has been sitting empty for months. The local coffee shop that survived the pandemic just closed its doors. That handyman you used to call? He's driving for Uber now because nobody's hiring him for repairs anymore. These aren't random coincidences. They're warning signs of something much bigger that's quietly dismantling the American middle class. And if you think you're immune just because you're still paying your bills on time, you might want to stick around for what I'm about to show you. And hey, if you find this eye-opening, hit that subscribe button because what's coming next will affect every single one of us, and you'll want to stay ahead of it. We're witnessing the slow-motion collapse of household economics in America, and it's happening in plain sight. But here's the thing most people miss. This isn't about one crisis. It's about 7 different pressure points hitting simultaneously, each one making the others worse. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why your paycheck feels worthless, why your savings account never grows, and what's really behind the financial anxiety that's keeping millions of Americans awake at night. The inflation mirage when numbers lie. Here's what they're not telling you. The government announced inflation dropped to around 3% in 2025. Politicians celebrated. Economists breathed sighs of relief. The Federal Reserve patted itself on the back. But walk into any grocery store, open any utility bill, or try to fill up your gas tank, and you'll see a completely different reality. This is what I call the inflation mirage. On paper, everything looks manageable. In your bank account, it's a disaster. Food prices didn't just tick up 3%, they've been climbing relentlessly for 3 straight years, compounding into increases that feel closer to 20% or 30% for many staple items. That gallon of milk that cost $3 in 2021, it's pushing $5 now in many places. Ground beef, eggs, bread, vegetables, every single trip to the store costs more than the last. But the official statistics smooth all of this out, averaging everything together until the real pain disappears into decimal points. They don't account for the fact that you can't just stop buying food. You can't substitute electricity with something cheaper. These aren't optional expenses you can optimize away. They're survival costs, and when survival costs outpace your income for 3 years running, something has to break. The gap between reported inflation and lived inflation is where American families are falling through the cracks. It's not that people are bad at budgeting or financially irresponsible. It's that the economic ground beneath them has fundamentally shifted, and nobody in power wants to acknowledge just how bad it's gotten. The utility crisis nobody's talking about. Now let's talk about something that should terrify you. Over 14 million American households started 2025 carrying overdue utility balances large enough to risk complete service shutoff. Read that again. 14 million families. That's not a small pocket of poverty. That's a systemic crisis affecting 1 out of every 9 households in the country. The average past due amount? Nearly $790. But this isn't just about people falling behind by a month or two. This represents families who've been pushed so far to the edge that they're now choosing between electricity and food, between water and medication, between heat in winter and paying the rent. What changed? Utilities used to be predictable. You knew roughly what your bill would be each month and it was manageable. Now, electricity costs have been rising faster than overall inflation for years, driven by infrastructure upgrades, fuel volatility, extreme weather events, and regional pricing chaos. Water and sewer bills have skyrocketed as aging systems require expensive repairs, and those costs get passed directly to consumers. A water bill that used to run $40 now hits $120 in some areas. Electric bills that averaged $100 are pushing $250 or more, especially during summer and winter when heating and cooling become non-negotiable. These aren't luxury services. These are the absolute basics of modern civilization, and they're now behaving like major debt obligations. When millions of people simultaneously can't afford to keep their lights on, that's not a personal finance problem. That's an economic structure that's failing at the most fundamental level. And when utilities eat up an outsized portion of income, everything else falls like dominoes. Medical bills go unpaid, credit cards max out, rent gets late. The entire financial foundation cracks under the weight. The debt trap, America's $16 trillion problem. So what happens when your income can't cover your expenses? You borrow. And America has been borrowing like never before. By late 2024, total household debt in the United States hit its highest level in recorded history. Mortgages climbed past $13 trillion. Credit card debt blew past $1.2 trillion. Student loans hovered around $1.6 trillion as repayments resumed after years of pandemic pause. But here's where it gets really dark: the delinquency rates. Roughly 4.5% of all household debt is now in some stage of delinquency, from early missed payments to accounts that are over 90 days past due. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that families simply cannot pay back. Student loan delinquencies jumped to over 9%. 9%! These aren't people who borrowed recklessly. These are college graduates who did everything they were told to do: get educated, get a degree, get a good job. Except the good jobs don't pay enough to cover student loans, plus rent, plus utilities, plus everything else that's gotten more expensive. Auto loan delinquencies are rising too. People are losing their cars, which in most of America means losing their ability to get to work, which means losing their income entirely. It's a death spiral. And credit card companies? They've charged off billions in unpaid debt, levels not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. These aren't just statistics. These are families who've reached the point where they can't even make minimum payments anymore. Debt was supposed to be a bridge, a temporary tool to smooth out rough patches. Instead, it's become a trap, and millions of Americans are caught in it with no clear way out. Housing. The American dream becomes a nightmare. Remember when owning a home was the cornerstone of building wealth in America? When a steady job and some discipline could get you into a house with a yard and a future? Those days feel like ancient history now. The housing affordability crisis isn't coming. It's already here, and it's absolutely brutal. Renters in major cities are spending record percentages of their income just to keep a roof overhead. 50%, 60%, sometimes more of their entire paycheck goes to rent before they've bought a single gallon of milk or paid a single utility bill. Aspiring homeowners face an even bleaker picture. Mortgage rates, while off their peaks, are still elevated. Home prices, meanwhile, haven't corrected the way everyone predicted they would. They've stayed stubbornly high, propped up by limited inventory and institutional buyers. The combination means that monthly mortgage payments have effectively doubled or tripled compared to just a few years ago. But even if you already own your home, you're not safe. Property taxes keep climbing. Homeowners insurance has become obscenely expensive, especially in areas prone to natural disasters. Basic maintenance costs have exploded as labor shortages and material costs squeeze contractors and homeowners alike. A roof replacement that cost $8,000 5 years ago now runs $15,000 or more. And here's a metric that should concern everyone. Home inspectors are reporting their slowest business in decades. Mortgage loan officers say their workload has shrunk to a fraction of what it used to be. Transaction volume has cratered. Why? Because an entire generation of potential buyers has been completely priced out of the market. They're stuck renting, unable to build equity, unable to access the wealth-building mechanism that powered the middle class for generations. When housing becomes unattainable for average workers, you don't just have a real estate problem, you have a social stability problem. Living on the edge, the paycheck-to-paycheck reality. Here's a statistic that should make your stomach turn. Nearly 30% of lower-income households now operate with zero financial buffer. None. Not a month of expenses saved up, not even 2 weeks. They're running on empty, and any unexpected expense, a car breakdown, a medical bill, a broken appliance, becomes an instant crisis that can trigger a cascade of late payments and debt. But it's not just low-income families anymore. Middle-income households, the ones who used to represent stability and upward mobility, are increasingly living the same precarious existence. They're making decent money on paper, but after rent or mortgage, utilities, transportation, food, and basic necessities, there's nothing left. No cushion, no margin for error, no ability to build wealth or plan for the future. This is the paycheck-to-paycheck trap, and it's become the defining financial reality for most American families. It means that despite working full-time, despite doing everything right, people are perpetually one disaster away from ruin. A medical emergency, a job loss, a rent increase, any of these can be the domino that topples everything else. The psychological toll is crushing. Financial insecurity isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, it's constant anxiety. It's making decisions not based on what's best, but on what you can barely afford. It's watching your future narrow into just trying to survive the current month. Long-term planning becomes impossible. Retirement savings become a joke. The idea of taking a vacation or making a major purchase becomes fantasy. Previous generations could count on a steady job providing a reliable path upward. Work hard, save some money, build a better life. That contract has been broken. Today, a steady job often means you're merely treading water, exhausting yourself just to stay in place. And for millions, even that's no longer enough. The Great Disconnect: Wall Street versus Main Street. Here's something that probably infuriates you, and it should. While ordinary Americans struggle to afford groceries and keep their utilities on, the stock market keeps hitting record highs. Corporate profits look fantastic. Business headlines scream about innovation and growth and unprecedented opportunities. The disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street has never been wider or more grotesque. This isn't an accident, it's by design. Financial markets rally when companies increase efficiency, which is often just a euphemism for cutting workers and suppressing wages. Layoffs send stock prices soaring because investors see higher profit margins ahead. But every job cut is a family losing income, a household losing stability, a community losing spending power. The rise of artificial intelligence and automation accelerates this divide. Companies deploy AI, productivity increases, shareholders celebrate, and workers? They're left competing for fewer jobs that pay less and offer less security. The market loves it, workers suffer through it, and the gap keeps growing. Even the broader economic indicators that politicians love to cite mask this underlying fragility. GDP growth might look solid, but it's increasingly fueled by consumer debt rather than rising incomes. People are spending more because they're borrowing more, not because they're earning more. It's a house of cards, and everyone can feel it swaying. This is why you can have economists declaring the economy strong while ordinary people feel like they're drowning. They're measuring two completely different realities. One is numbers on spreadsheets optimized for corporate profit. The other is human lives trying to survive in an economic system that stopped working for them. The collapse at ground level. When local economies crumble. National statistics might look stable, but if you zoom in to the ground level, you'll see something very different happening. The cracks are showing up first in the small service sectors, the people who depend on discretionary household spending to make a living. Talk to handymen, home inspectors, independent contractors, repair specialists, small tradespeople. Many are experiencing something they've never seen before: extended periods with zero work despite strong reputations and years of experience. It's not that people's homes have stopped needing repairs. It's that families are attempting to fix things themselves rather than pay someone else to do it, simply because they can't afford the labor. Mortgage professionals tell similar stories. Loan officers in once thriving markets say their volume has collapsed to a fraction of what it was. Some branches are operating on skeleton crews. Referral networks that used to generate steady business have gone cold. The dream of home ownership has stalled out so completely that an entire industry is gasping for air. These aren't just individual hard luck stories. They're canaries in the coal mine. When local service providers lose income, they cut their own spending, which means other businesses lose customers, which means more people lose income. It's a vicious cycle that spreads through communities like a contagion. And because these small, local economic indicators are so sensitive to household financial pressure, they often signal trouble long before it shows up in official employment reports or GDP numbers. By the time the national data catches up, the damage is already done. The perfect storm, when everything hits at once. Here's what makes the current situation so devastating. None of these problems are happening in isolation. They're all hitting simultaneously, and worse, they're amplifying each other in ways that make escape nearly impossible. Rising utilities eat into the money available for rent. Higher rent forces people onto credit cards. Growing credit card balances mean larger minimum payments. Bigger minimum payments drain savings. Without savings, any unexpected expense triggers a crisis. That crisis leads to missed payments. Missed payments destroy credit scores. Bad credit makes everything more expensive, from car insurance to apartment deposits to emergency loans, and the cycle spirals tighter. This is convergence in action. It's why families who used to manage just fine now feel like they're suffocating. They're not dealing with one challenge they can work around. They're dealing with 7 overlapping crises, each one making the others worse. The systems that used to provide stability, predictable wages, affordable housing, manageable utilities, accessible savings, have all weakened or failed simultaneously. There's no safety net left. There's no cushion to fall back on. And for millions of families, there's no clear path forward. Economists can debate whether we're technically in a recession, but households don't measure reality by GDP growth rates. They measure it by whether they can pay their bills, whether they're going deeper into debt, and whether their children will have better opportunities than they did. By those measures, we're already in crisis. We have been for years. It's just that nobody in power wants to admit how bad things have really gotten. Real lives, real consequences. Behind every statistic I've shared with you is a human being making impossible choices. Retirees on fixed incomes skipping medications so they can afford to eat. Parents working multiple jobs but still receiving shutoff notices from utility companies. Young adults abandoning dreams of home ownership and families because the math simply doesn't work anymore. These aren't lazy people. They're not financially irresponsible. They're ordinary Americans who worked hard, played by the rules, and still ended up on the losing side of an economic system that's fundamentally broken. A system that rewards wealth accumulation at the top while hollowing out the middle and squeezing the bottom until there's nothing left. The emotional weight of this reality is crushing. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the constant stress, the feeling of falling behind no matter how hard you work, the realization that the future you were promised isn't coming. That realization is spreading, and it's changing how people think about work, about money, about America itself. Surviving the storm, what people are actually doing. Faced with this overwhelming pressure, Americans are adapting however they can. They're learning to fix things themselves, cutting every possible expense, simplifying lifestyles down to bare necessities. Some are building emergency funds, even tiny ones, knowing that any buffer is better than none. Others are exploring alternative ways to protect their purchasing power in an increasingly unstable environment. But let's be clear, personal adaptation cannot solve systemic problems. You can budget perfectly, eliminate every luxury, work 3 jobs, and still fall behind if wages don't keep pace with the cost of survival. Individual resilience is admirable, but it's not a substitute for an economic structure that actually works for working people. What we're seeing is a generation being forced to develop survival skills for an economy that's supposed to be the richest and most advanced in human history. That's not success. That's failure, dressed up in the language of hustle culture and personal responsibility. The bigger picture. When you step back and look at everything together, the picture becomes undeniable. We're not dealing with temporary inflation or a rough patch in the business cycle. We're witnessing a fundamental breakdown in the systems that support middle-class life in America. Rising utilities, crushing debt, unaffordable housing, stagnant wages, disappearing savings, financial markets disconnected from real life, and local economies crumbling from the bottom up. These aren't separate problems. They're all symptoms of the same disease, an economic structure optimized for corporate profit and asset appreciation, while the actual cost of human existence spirals out of control. This is the reality that millions of families navigate every single day. This is why people feel like they're drowning even when the headlines say everything's fine. And this is why the gap between official narratives and lived experience has become a chasm that nobody can ignore anymore. What comes next? So where does this lead? That depends entirely on whether enough people wake up to what's actually happening and demand something different. The current trajectory is unsustainable. You can't have a functioning economy when the majority of households are living paycheck to paycheck with no savings and mounting debt. You can't maintain social stability when an entire generation is being priced out of home ownership and basic security. Something will give. The question is whether it happens through deliberate policy changes that rebuild the systems supporting working families, or whether it happens through economic collapse and social unrest when millions of people simultaneously reach their breaking point. What's your experience been? Are you feeling these pressures in your own life? Drop a comment below. I read every single one, and your stories matter. If this breakdown helped you see the full picture of what's really happening, make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next is going to affect all of us, and staying informed might be the most important thing you can do right now. The numbers don't lie, even when the official narrative tries to smooth them over. The American cost of living crisis isn't coming, it's already here, and it's reshaping the future in ways we're only beginning to understand.